here deputising for Tracy today. She's the new Director of Strategy at the Homerton, replacing Claire Hogg. Welcome. Just to go through the housekeeping hybrid meeting, we've got some here in the town hall at Hackney, others joining remotely. We're being live streamed, we're being recorded, members of the press may be watching. Please keep your microphones on mute unless when you are speaking. Please keep your cameras on. Please don't use the chat function. Raise your hand if you'd like to speak and I will call upon you. And I think that is it. I haven't been notified of any urgent items or orders of business, declarations of interest. Are there? I've got Councillor Snell.
My usual one, non-pecuniary interest as chair of the board of the North East London Charity DABD UK.
Thank you, Cllr Masters.
My usual one as well. I'm a Director of Health Transformation Policy and Neighbourhoods with Hackney CBS, a role funded by Hackney and City CCG.
Thank you both. With that then, we will progress to our first substantive item, which is on Whips Cross. Welcome to Ralph Coulbeck, who is the Director of Strategy at Barts. Thank you, Ralph, for joining us. Just to give some brief background, there is due to be a Waltham Forest, Redbridge and Essex Jhosc, particularly on this item in October, but because of overlapping interest, we thought it appropriate to give it a half an hour slot here for an update. As I understand it, the planning application is imminent or in train at the moment. To go through with that, we've got a helpful, succinct 5-page presentation which came via email from Ralph. Ralph, do you want to speak for 5 or so minutes on it, and then I'll throw it open to questions?
Yeah, sure, happy to do that. I'm assuming you can hear me okay, so I'll just give a précis of the position, which hopefully the paper covers as well. I think the first thing to say is that the progress with the planning for the redevelopment remains strong, and hopefully the paper gives some evidence of that. We've continued to refine the clinical strategy for the redevelopment and for the Whips Cross health system, and have started to take account of the impact of the pandemic on future requirements in doing that. We've progressed the design of the new hospital to another level of detail, what's called the REBA 2 stage, which means we're at the level of 1 to 200 drawings of the new hospital. And we're very excited about that. We've designed a new hospital which will have an increased amount of clinical space compared with what we have now, and will enable, we hope, a number of different new models of care that will improve quality for our patients and realise the vision of the redevelopment. The design includes an ambition for net zero carbon and the realisation of our digital strategy as well. We've also, as you alluded to, progressed the master planning for the wider Whips Cross site, including potential for a large number of new homes in line with the local plan, a significantly enhanced neighbourhood with lots of additional green space and facilities for community health on the redevelopment site. And all of that has gone into the planning application that you referenced, which was submitted to Waltham Forest in May of this year and is currently in the planning process. We've also developed the financial case to the outline business case level of detail, which is a level of detail beyond what we've done previously. And we're starting to take practical steps on the site to prepare for the redevelopment with the demolition of obsolete buildings on the part of the site where we intend to build a new hospital in time. So good practical progress. We continue our interaction with the National Hospitals Programme, which is the national overarching scheme that's bringing forward a number of different investments in the NHS. And WIPS remains one of the 8 pathfinder schemes within the national programme. The national programme emphasises design standardisation across the hospitals in the programme, so we are working with the other hospitals in that first group to further standardise design and to ensure we can meet the various business case requirements of the Department of Health and the Treasury. We are still awaiting some clarity on the procurement process for going to market for construction, which will be overseen nationally, and for the final timelines for business cases and so on. So we do await that eagerly from the national programme. It is worth highlighting that clearly we had a very serious incident at Whipps Cross at the end of July, when the extreme rainfall caused a major incident, caused flooding that meant we lost power to significant parts of the estate. Our staff responded fantastically to that very difficult situation, as did our partners, the fire brigade and the ambulance service, and we were able to manage that incident safely and restore services over the days that followed. But it is a timely reminder of the urgency of the redevelopment and the challenges we have with continuing to operate the current estate. And we're obviously making those representations with stakeholders on that front. And I guess the final thing I'd highlight is we do continue to engage widely on the redevelopment plans. We held a large number of public meetings as part of developing our planning application. We have significant clinical engagement in the design process for the new hospital, and we've done our best to listen and engage with stakeholders on a number of the key issues. We've drawn out in the paper a couple of areas where that listening and engagement is causing us to sort of refine and develop our plans further. One area is end-of-life care, where we intend to work with our system and the wider health community on further developing the model of end-of-life care in the hospital and in the system around the hospital. We recognise the concerns in that area, and we know we need to do more to develop that model. And also on bed numbers, although the hospital will have a lot of different and additional clinical space, we do recognise the concern about bed numbers, and so we've confirmed recently that if needed, the new hospital can accommodate the same number of beds that we have now, and we'll continue to work with partners on refining the final assumptions. So we look forward, as you mentioned, to the future Jhosc arrangements that I understand are coming in place in the autumn. It's part of the ongoing listening and engagement process. So I'll stop there. I'm very happy to take.
Thanks, Greg. Just before I have questions, one quick fire question from me. In terms of the amount of housing that's going to be built at the same time, how many houses are we talking about? Are they all for private sale, or are some shared ownership, some key worker? What's the split?
So the local plan proposed up to 1,500 new homes on the site, and the planning application we've submitted is essentially in that territory. I think it can go up to 1,600 depending on what you assume about different details of the site, but that's the kind of territory. We're currently assuming a 50-50 split between affordable and other types of housing. We haven't gone down into the fine detail of within sub-splits of that, but we're working on the broad assumption of 50% affordable housing.
Obviously, affordable is a loaded term these days in terms of what it means, but somewhere, I mean, I don't want to. I appreciate you might not be in a position to drill down in that too much more now, but essentially what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, is possibly 50% private sale, and a lot of councils are here are used to that model, and 50% somewhere on the affordable spectrum as defined. How priority is it that we can actually see key worker housing there, perhaps for nurses and doctors who might even be working at Whipps Cross?
That's something that is perfectly possible within the plans. I think we need to make some further assessments of the actual demand for that type of accommodation. So we're very aware that that is a potential use and a potential element. We're not certain that large volumes of key worker housing are needed, but within that overall cohort of 1,500 homes, there's absolutely potential for additional key worker housing if that proves to be needed, and that's one of the things that we'll be looking at in more detail as we get to the next stages. It's worth bearing in mind that clearly the timeline for the housing element of the scheme is somewhat longer, obviously, than the hospital element, because we have to build a new hospital, decant, dispose of the site, clear the site before the housing development can start. So clearly, while that might be part of our long-term plans, we also need shorter-term strategies in some cases for key worker accommodation.
Thank you. Questions from members? Cllr Masters.
You talk in the paper about a significant reduction in car parking spaces. We're very aware that a large number of staff sort of travel in and work on social hours. How much research has been done to ensure that those people will definitely have a space should they need one?
Quite a bit, and this is a really tough balancing act, the car parking. We currently have around 1,200 spaces on the site, and the reduction we're proposing is between 25 and 40%, depending on final decisions. Within that cohort, I think we can be very confident that there would always be space for staff that are travelling out of hours. The usage of car parking, obviously, in the evening and overnight is much lower. The question really is what's the peak requirement, on a busy weekday during the day, and how many spaces do we need to accommodate patient and staff requirements at that time? But I'd be very confident that there will, under all circumstances, be hundreds of car parking spaces on the site, including hundreds designated for staff. So there will definitely be provision within that for on-call and antisocial usage.
Any other questions? Richard, Council Sweden.
Thanks very much, and thanks for the presentation. I've got two things I'd like to ask. I know that I'll have a lot of opportunity to ask a lot of questions probably over the next 18 months or 2 years. Well, maybe only for a few months, actually, thinking about the electoral process. I've always been quite concerned about provision for end-of-life care, which you mentioned in the briefing. And I just wondered whether you could tell us a little bit about how you're going to explore how to go forward, because I think if the original proposals had gone ahead, Waltham Forest would have been bereft of any hospice provision, any inpatient hospice provision whatsoever. So I'm quite relaxed about exploring it with partners such as St Joseph's, but I just wondered about the mechanism for going forward in that way. I am anxious that some inpatient hospice provision should be retained in the borough. And secondly, you mentioned about the problems of that had been highlighted by the recent flood, which my ward is very close to the Whips Cross site and was quite severely affected. And in addition to houses that were in flood areas being affected, which was appalling for those people, several of our new build developments were affected because they had not been adequately designed in order to deal with an unexpected flood, and for instance lifts were put out of action. So my question to you really is the developer's brief to make something that's absolutely flood-proof? Because there's no doubt that Whips is although relatively on high ground, there's an underground river system that runs close to Whips, so it's something that has to be thought of, and also hollow ponds which are adjacent, which are higher up, which hold a lot of water. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, on end-of-life care, we're currently working with partners, including, as you say, St Joseph's, to design the exact mechanism that we'll use to undertake that further review, and we'd welcome any steer on that. As you say, what we in receiving feedback on the kind of future inpatient model of end-of-life care, we inevitably were drawn into discussions about the wider provision and the limited hospice capacity of Waltham Forest overall, and completely recognise that as a challenge, which is why we do want to broaden the discussion about end-of-life care so that it takes in that challenge as well, and want to bring partners to the table with more expertise than we have within the trust on that wider community provision. That doesn't mean we're not still thinking about the model within the hospital and how that connects, but we want to make that wider conversation I think that will inevitably take the form of some kind of review of process with stakeholders, as we mentioned in the paper. We just haven't quite designed that in detail yet. Regarding the flooding, the short answer to the question is yes, it will be within the brief, certainly within the brief to the hospital developer, that there needs to be, I was going to say watertight, that's not the right.
It is the right term.
It probably is the right term, but very, very clear flood mitigation, and that is designed into the hospital plan that we've submitted, as is wider mitigation steps on the wider site to obviously mitigate the risk of flooding on the wider in the wider neighbourhood. So we're not just about sort of protecting the new hospital. We understand that there's a much wider issue as we experience. So on both those fronts, yes, within our planning application, there are clear proposals to mitigate that risk once the development takes place.
And just on that last point, Ralph, I mean, presumably post the floods, you've gone back and re-emphasised the need for, I mean, I appreciate the answer you give, but a site is where a site is, and if there are geographical, topographical reasons why it will flood, for all the love nor money in terms of design, you might not be able to avoid groundwater levels and what have you. I mean, just going back to basics, is it a suitable site for a brand new hospital that's going to last 30, 40 years, or if not more?
Yes, I mean the flooding was concentrated in a part of the site which is not the one on which we plan to build a new hospital. So that's the first. So we're not building on the lowest part of the site, which is the area that was flooded, but we are also planning substantial mitigation. I won't get into technical detail because I'm not capable of it, but there is substantial opportunity to mitigate the overall flooding risk to that lowest part of the site as well, which would otherwise leave the wider development vulnerable through the creation of underground mitigation mechanisms that I won't try to describe, but all of that is within our proposals.
Councillor Hudson, thank you.
Yes, Chair, there is a lesson to be learned here. It's noticeable that the flooding took place in the summer. And when you're dealing with clay, the ground it doesn't absorb water in the summer, it does in the winter, but it's wet. So it's as hard as concrete, it will run off. And I hope that lesson learned, or lesson will be learned, and will be borne into mind when you're giving your brief. It's probably the reason why the other council referred to a new housing boom. People hadn't taken into account the fact that you're more likely to get flooding in heavy rain in summer than in winter. Thank you.
Yeah, the other issue we had was the storm drains became overwhelmed. They couldn't allow any more water egress, and there are, as I say, there are technical solutions to that, or technical mitigations to that through the creation of underground runoff areas that are part of our consideration for the overall master plan. That doesn't affect the area we're planning to build the new hospital so much, but it does affect this area that was flooded recently.
Any other questions from councillors? Ralph, what's the overall budget for the hospital?
The current capital estimates based on our OBC level design indicates the capital cost in the region of 850 million for the new hospital. And 866 is our current planning assumption, but you'll appreciate at this stage of design there's a reasonable range of reasonable range around that number, and that would include, you know, inflation and VAT and so on, and all those other additional costs. The core construction cost is closer to 600 million. And that at the moment working on all funding from Treasury, or will some money for the next, say, 25 years come out of the Inel pot, because we said this will help us make cost savings, or is there some trade-off there? Our working assumption, in line with the NHP, is that the core source of capital funds will be public dividend capital, which essentially means Treasury funding. and that remains the core planning assumption for all schemes in NHP. As I say, the discussions around business case development and Treasury requirements are ongoing, but that certainly remains our core assumption. There may be some modest contribution from charitable sources, but I would expect that to be, very much at the periphery, given the scale of investment that's needed overall. And in time, there will be proceeds from the sale of the land, which would be expected to be returned to the Treasury, but that would obviously be subsequent to the build and dependent on the build. There's a slightly different question about the revenue side. Obviously, that degree of public capital currently brings reasonably substantial revenue charges with it. That's the public policy decision. But we currently, one of the issues our business case examines is the affordability of that capital to Barts Health and the overall North East London system. And we believe that level of capital and its revenue consequences is affordable, can be affordable, but it's important that the system understands the assumptions that's based on and can make mitigations to make that revenue case work as well. I think that's the area that has the more substantial implications for the North East London system, assuming that promise of Treasury capital holds.
And just to sort of more layman speak in terms of the revenue costs, as I understand that, it's a bit like if we draw an analogy with a mortgage, you've got to pay sort of the cost of borrowing that money. Is it sort of on an interest basis that you're paying that money, or are you gradually paying down that 850 or whatever million, more like a repayment model? What's the base?
There's aspects of that. I can see Henry on my screen, who could probably answer that question later better than I can. But the core thing is public dividend capital comes with a 3.5% charge, and that generates a substantial proportion of the revenue cost, and clearly on an investment in the territory that I've mentioned, which is the same territory that all the new hospital programme schemes are looking at. That's the substantial revenue impact, and the thing that our system and Barts as a trust would need to be able to cover.
Is that in perpetuity?
That might be the question in which Henry's better to answer.
Well, I probably don't want to get too bound down in that level of.
We certainly think that needs to be sustainably covered.
Okay, all right, but I suppose you would say that, look, you've got with a hospital that's, one of the arguments you would presumably make is with a hospital that's not in a good condition anyway, then the amount of money you're spending on repairs and the amount of money you can make on efficiency savings by having a better site sort of offsets part of that cost, I guess. That's
correct. I mean, that's the equation that needs to work, and we believe it does work, and we believe our OBC will show that it works, but that requires a combination of actions by Whipps Cross, actions by Barts as a group, and actions by the North East London system to make that equation balance.
Councillor Hudson, do you want to come in?
Yes. Is the interest charge based on the gross cost or the net cost after you've got your money back from selling the site?
The former.
Gross
cost, yeah.
So you pay the whole of the cost and the Treasury pockets the benefit?
To be honest, I don't think we know the answer to that, to be honest, in terms of how the Treasury will treat the subsequent dividend, which is in the scheme, that will have an impact, but it's a relatively marginal impact in any case.
Thank you, Ralph. Any other? Although I'm sort of interested in the financial angle, I don't want to sort of get too rabbit holed on that, because otherwise we could go down there. I'm just looking for any other members that haven't asked questions. Councillor Masters?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing we haven't really touched on is this business about the reduction in beds, and I'm just wondering at the moment how strong your delayed discharges of care performance is.
It's reasonable. It's reasonable. The site is under a fair bit of pressure at the moment, as a large parts of the NHS, but it's okay. I think that, though, there's recognition in Waltham Forest, that length of stay is longer than other parts of North East London, and historically, and to some extent still now, the delayed transfers are more significant in Waltham Forest and some other parts of North East London, and that's all linked to differing levels of investment in services and so on, which we could debate, but at the moment, our strategy would say there is significant opportunity to do better, and that would be better for patients, and it would bring about a more effective model of care, and those are the assumptions that we are looking at that link to the future capacity requirements of the hospital.
And just, if I can, just going back to sort of the transport car parking issue, I mean, in terms of new transport infrastructure, what are we talking? Are we talking possibly more working with TfL for more bus capacity, or would there be any option for extra rail capacity in the medium term?
It's the former. We're not aware of any options to increase rail capacity, but importantly, there is an option. What we can't currently do at the moment is bring double-decker buses through the site, and the intention in the redeveloped site would be that we could do, which would make a big difference. And we are in discussion with TfL also about bus routes and volumes, and particularly bus links to Redbridge and so on. So that's one of the key opportunities, along with the much wider encouragement of cycling and walking for people that live within a reasonable distance, which is very much in line, certainly, with Waltham Forest's wider planning for the area.
And when do we? I mean, I'm looking on members. Anyone else have another question? In terms of just going back to housing, I appreciate your point in terms of, look, we're some way off that, because the first stage would be build the hospital, the new hospital, then you've got to decant the old hospital to the new hospital, and then at that point you start the housing development, as it were. At what point would we have greater clarity on sort of the tenure mix that will end up being the case, or is that going to remain fluid for some time? And I suppose I was slightly surprised by your comment, query the need for key worker. I mean, that against, as an inner London councillor, my experience. I would also just make the point that it's not necessarily just somebody in their first few years of qualification, but it's when someone's reaching mid-career and realising they can't afford a family house in London, and this is when you get your schools and your hospitals losing mid-tenure members of staff who actually could be grown and would be very useful to stay in terms of progression. And so I wondered, just thinking more about the 3 or 4 bed offer on the key working side as well, and thinking in those terms, because it automatically, it didn't resonate with me at all, the suggestion that there wasn't a need for proper key worker, for key worker housing across the ladder.
Yeah, and perhaps I should have been clearer that I was saying the volume and type is the bit that is what we want to understand better. I think we do start from the assumption there will be some need, and that might be a subject that we can, along with the overall tenure mix, that we can brief the forthcoming Jhosc on in more detail, because we do have more detail that's gone into the planning application on this. I guess my overall reflection would be, if we think about a cohort of 1,500 up to 1,500 or even more homes overall, then clearly within that total envelope, there's plenty of opportunity to develop the right offer for key worker housing. It's a really good point that can take lots of different forms. But if I compare that context with where we are, the constraints we have on some of our other sites, the Royal London site and so on, I'm confident that we have got enough opportunity to develop the right offer in the future Whipps Cross, and very happy to make that one of the subjects that we can provide more detail on pretty soon.
I think if it's an hour and a half odd meeting, I think that would be something that would inevitably engender public interest, albeit I'm not sharing that. So I've got about 1 minute left. Any last quick fire question, or shall we wrap? We'll bearing in mind we've got there's quite Councillor Adams, last question.
Yes. I'm just wondering how affordable is the affordable that's going to be provided on this site? And will the local people be given preference in the sale of the property that's going to be developed on the site?
I think those are not things we've defined yet. So those are things that, in the spirit of the previous answer, we can come back to if we bring more detail on that subject. But we haven't fixed those questions yet.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think a lot of us here have had experience of different housing developments over a number of years. If you provide offer for very local residents, maybe not all of it, but some of it, it certainly helps create buy-in along the way. So to the extent to which that be considered would be appreciated.
I could perhaps add, Chair, that if it follows the other large-scale developments that we've had in the borough, that percentage of the development that is offered for social rent is only available to those who are on Waltham Forest housing waiting list.
Yes, for social rent. Yeah.
For the social rent, and that's normally a reasonable percentage. But you know, the greater part of the affordable slice.
Right.
If it follows those. That precedent, which I think it probably will.
With that, thank you, Councillor Sweden. I'll draw that item to a close, and then I think we were talking about it before. I'm not quite sure who's going to chair that meeting in October, but I think maybe work with them about what the agenda would look like. I'm looking at Councillor Sweden, whether it may be him, but as to what particular areas to cover. But thank you very much, Ralph, and we'll leave it there. Thank you. And Ralph, please don't feel the need to stay. Please feel free to leave us.
Thank you.
So the next substantive item we have is item number 5, which is the structure of Barts Health and provider collaboration. This being separate from where we're going as an integrated care system. I mean, where this partly comes from is that I think the shared governance that we're now seeing across BHRUT and former Home Secretary Jacquie Smith being appointed to that, as I understand it, that governance role, and how all of this fits together in terms of, I think, across those then two hospital groups. You've got, say, if I've got this right, I got it wrong last meeting, but say 6 hospitals, all with sort of a management team, then another layer of management on top of that, and then feeding into this overall governance structure. Why are we choosing that? Why is that the best model for North East London? Say, why is that better than having individual hospitals with their own management team? So really, it was, this item was really designed, hopefully, for Alwen with her experience and knowledge of this, and having done a successful job at Barts, to explain what's the value add of this system. Alwen, can I go straight to you, or is there a introduction?
No, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. I thought would it be helpful if I just said a few words about the Barts Group structure?
Yes, please.
And then describe where we're heading in terms of collaboration. So really, by way of background, the group model at Barts was initiated in 2016. So we're in about year 5 of the group structure. It was one of the firsts nationally, but as you'll appreciate, there's more of a, I mean, I think certainly within the policy really of the NHS now of really bringing together through collaboration, and there are different ways of doing this. The Barts Health was brought together in 2012 as a merger, and the group structure in terms of how best to run a group of 5 hospitals emerged in 2015-16, and we've had 5 years experience of that, and other parts of the country are moving and have already moved towards this way of ensuring that the collaboration is in place across a number of hospitals. I mean, I obviously haven't got time this evening to go through the detail, but in essence, I think, Ben, you've given the description really, which is each hospital has a recognisable leadership team, and that leadership team is not too dissimilar to that which you'd see in an individual hospital. There are some differences that are as a result of the group structure, but effectively a leadership team in situ in each hospital. Although we've got 5 hospitals, the Royal London and Mile End is managed by a single leadership team. And it's true to say also, as well as running the hospitals, those teams increasingly in the last few years have been very much involved in place in boroughs in terms of working with wider partners on a range of issues relating to service delivery and health improvement. We have then the group structure, and the group structure comprises of a range of what we call clinical boards. These are effectively, and if we think of a matrix, the hospitals being part of the matrix, and clinical boards effectively being a horizontal matrix, bringing clinicians together that are of similar specialties, essentially to drive clinical strategy, standardisation, reduce artificial variation, and really look across the group in terms of best standards of care for patients at scale. And I would say that those clinical boards at Barts have really come into their own, particularly with COVID, when actually we were doing this in real time across a group of 5 hospitals, given the scale of the challenge that we were facing at the time. There are group directors. You've just heard from one, Ralph Coulbeck, who's Director of Strategy at Barts. So we have a number of group directors who hold, the overall accountability for a range of services and functions, ranging from strategy and transformation through to performance, operational delivery and finance, and that's across the group. So the group leadership team really is, there's a very significant clinical leadership component through the clinical boards, and then effectively group functional directors that provide overall leadership to the group. If we look back over the last 5 years, I would say there's been a proof of concept in that Barts Health has improved its quality and performance. And as you all know, we've exited both quality and financial special measures, which is where we were in 2016, and indeed have been rated good by the CQC for well-led, effective care and caring, and effectively we're working hard to effectively bring about improved ratings in safe and responsive, and confident that we can do that going forward. And indeed on the financial front, a very positive outturn of the last couple of years. So have, the importance of having a stable financial position that, is based on the most effective use of resources, and that in turn safeguards the quality improvements that we've made. I would also say, I think the stability of the leadership teams has been a success and a facet of the structure. So we've had, we know across the NHS that there are at times real challenges when there is a high turnover of leaders. But we've had a very stable leadership team, and in a sense that's given us a common purpose and a continuity in terms of all that we've been doing within the organisation. So in terms of just a few examples over and above that, in terms of improvements, we've developed a surgical strategy that really speaks to improving care for patients, both in terms of very specialist services, but also local services. You've just heard about the Whipps Cross redevelopment, and the group structure enabled us to get into that first wave of the national programme for hospital redevelopments, and that can't be underestimated. There was a significant amount of work required to do that. We're developing an exciting life sciences campus at Whitechapel, and as I said earlier, within each borough we can also pinpoint to some really exciting innovation and development that a combination of group structures, our clinical boards and our hospital leadership teams have been taking forward with system partners as well. In terms of workforce across the group, we've instigated a range of new ways of looking at workforce. So we always have hotspots where it's difficult to recruit, and we've set up job rotations sharing workforce across the group in terms of ensuring consistency of supply. And that's not just frontline staff, for example, A&E nurses and critical care nurses, for example, but also senior leaders who have worked across the hospitals in different roles. We've been able to look hard at what population health and population need, and have been able to shift some of our specialist services from, for example, cardiac services, for example, from Barts Hospital more locally to Newham and Whipps Cross, where that's clearly the best thing to do for patients in terms of enabling access and ensuring that the cardiac services that are run by Barts Hospital but located at Whipps Cross and Newham clearly, again, comply with the highest possible standards. I have to call out really the resilience and the ability across the group of being able to, I mean, the last 18 months or so, COVID has taught us this, but indeed prior to that, in terms of some of the winter pressures that we've had in the past, but really looking at the pressures going on in each hospital and ensuring that that pressure is balanced. We instigate diverts, mutual aid, staff move from hospital to hospital. And indeed, the flooding, for example, at Whipps Cross, you know, in the middle of the night on a Sunday, we moved about 30 patients from Whipps Cross to Barts Hospital, 20 odd patients to the Royal London. And that was done seamlessly, given that we already had the key clinical and managerial relationships in situ. So resilience at times of extreme distress, you know, it's really brought home the relationships and the teamwork that enable that to happen. And that's been a factor all the way through COVID. I would also say finally, and partly in terms of financial, as well as kind of the effectiveness of services, being able to deliver some services at group level does mean that we're able to provide them at great value, and we're always looking at value for the taxpayer and reinvesting funding into frontline services. So if we look at some of our back office services, our payroll services, some of our procurement services, for example, we know that we're able to provide those efficiently, given that we're providing them at scale. That's a very quick run through the Barts Group model and structure. Happy to take questions, but quite hard to sort of synthesize what is quite a complex organisation. I hope that's given you a flavour, really, of the group. In terms of the collaboration with BHRUT, and I know I spoke about this at the last meeting, we've been through a whole process, sort of an appreciative inquiry, because clearly it's in all our interests to ensure that across the whole of North East London we're delivering very high quality care and ensuring all our hospitals are resilient, that we're able to use all the assets at our disposal given the very significant COVID recovery we have in terms of planned care. So we've been working with across the organisations, looking effectively at what the collaborative opportunities would be to achieve that. And we've come to a view about key priorities. They won't be a surprise. They relate to our COVID recovery, managing for the next 6 months through what is undoubtedly going to be a really difficult winter for the NHS, and again picking up the lessons of collaboration during some of the previous COVID peaks. But we're looking also at improvements in urgent and emergency care, and we know, for example, at BHRT they have some significant challenges at Queen's in terms of some of those aspects of delivery of urgent and emergency care. We've just seconded one of our Barts clinicians to be the Director of Improvement there, and bringing some of the learning from the improvements that have already been made at the Royal London Hospital in terms of improving access to patients, and vice versa. We've also been able to work with BHRT such that some of the patients on the Barts planned care waiting lists have been treated at King George Hospital as well. So it's very much about mutual aid and mutual support. We're working together on looking at workforce again. I've given some examples where that's worked well on the Barts Group model across hospitals, and we're just extending that and looking at what might be possible in terms of deepening that collaboration with BHRUT as well. And finally, looking particularly together at areas of population growth. We know when we look forward, particularly at Barking and Dagenham, Newham, there is very, very significant population growth. And if we weren't collaborating, clearly the risk would be that Barts would be worried about Newham and BHRT and colleagues in BHR would be worried about Barking and Dagenham. And actually by working together, and that's with ICS, primary care colleagues and mental health, I think we'll come up with a much better solution in terms of pathways and using assets across the North East London system of hospitals effectively. So as you write, Jacquie Smith starts as our new chair in a few weeks' time. Our boards are just reviewing this week, and actually the Barts board last week, with these sets of priorities. So what we're trying to do is locate our collaboration very much in the here and now, and the things that we need to really focus on to improve services for patients. The BHRT board are discussing that, and we hope early next week to put something more in the public domain that explains that to everybody, and again secures people's views and engagement into that. And finally, just to say, as you will know, that Matthew Traynor took up post only a few weeks ago as a substantive chief executive at BHRT, and which has been a very positive, has been received very, very positively. And again, we're working together to ensure that we're able to support Matthew to recruit to a very stable leadership team at BHRT going forward. And you know, whether there are opportunities across the Barts group, or we will be looking at those opportunities as well. So I think that's really a summary of where we are. Hope I've explained the Barts group sufficiently clearly, and also really to assure you that for the here and now, we're more concentrating the collaboration really about improvement to patient care and really helping us with resilience and sustainability in the coming months, given the challenges that we know that we're going to have ahead of us.
Thank you all. That's, I found that very helpful overview of the structure. Questions from members? Councillor Masters?
You talked about efficiencies at one point, but when we think about additional management structures coming through, you do tend to think about additional costs. So I'm just wondering, across the board, in terms of this new structure of management, are we going to be cost neutral? Is it going to sort of add debts? Or are we going to make savings because of the partnership working?
I think the discussions certainly so far have been that there are opportunities to look at look across the board at efficiency. Now, clearly, one of the things we're going to need to do is make sure we have a strategy going forward for not just for Barts and BHRT, but for the ICS in terms of sustainability. So that, I think, is a question across the board. But certainly looking at, as I mentioned earlier, some of our back office, middle office functions, we've been able to demonstrate, because we're able to benchmark our data nationally on this, that we're able to deliver, you know, good quality services, but more efficiently across because we can get those economies of scale, and I'm confident that we would be able to progress that as well.
And how is it working along with essentially the new governance structure? I mean, I appreciate it may be that this is what's fleshed out with what comes up later on in the week, but in terms of essentially one governing body, but essentially you've got the group structure at Barts and then BHRUT, essentially they've got a twin hat at the moment in terms of how the governance works. I mean, isn't that diluting the purpose of the governance? I mean, I've sort of seen on the Council of Governors at the Homerton, sort of your NEDs getting quite nitty-gritty at points in terms of risk committees at the hospital and adding a lot of value. But I can't quite see how you get that level of value from your NEDs, or is it a different way that the NEDs are very much focused on you as a senior leadership team, or now two senior leadership teams?
So I think what I would say, Ben, is that we're moving this forward incrementally. So we don't have a blueprint for how this would be taken forward in the way you're describing. you know, what we're doing is we're very much focusing the collaboration on with very enthusiastic clinicians leading this effectively across the two trusts. Jacquie will start in October, and what we'll be saying next week really is the first phase is to really focus, as I described, on quality and service improvement. And then what I know Jacquie will be doing is she'll be meeting both, you know, within the organisations, but also externally as she starts, and we'll be committing really in a number of months' time to come back and have a further conversation about how effectively you know, it's about how does governance enable the right things to happen rather than getting. So, you know, we certainly wouldn't want to put governance in place that effectively de-risk, that in a sense added risk in any way. I think certainly the governance structures in the group model have proven that we can, you know, what you need in a group model is very similar governance structures across each hospital, and then that can feed systematically into that oversight. And the group directors have a responsibility clearly for oversight, as well as leading strategy and transformation, but the board and the non-executives do as well. And we're very clear that that would need to continue, and that would need to continue in a transparent way for partners to understand, if you like, the performance and the issues that are going on in each hospital. So we'll give that a lot more thought. So we certainly, you know, we're not just saying, well, Barts is a group and BHRT is a trust. What we're saying at the moment is both are effectively separate trusts. We've each got our governance structures. We are going to need to work this through. But the priority for now is, as I've described earlier, quality and service improvement. And we'd certainly want to engage much more on anything else that we might do in the future.
So those clinical group teams that you talked about adding value at Barts, will they now go across Barts and BHRUT, for example?
Well, they've started. Yeah, some do. Some have already started, and some actually. I mean, this is going to be the fluidity of this. Some also include clearly clinicians from the Homerton. If you know, we've talked here, haven't we, about the particularly around elective care and some of the clinical networks that we've set up for elective surgery and planned care. But if we look for, I mean, cardiac services is a really good example where, for example, we've got a whole range of joint appointments already in place that have been there for a very long time as a result of the cardiac network that was in place in North East London when the heart attack centre opened at the old London Chest Hospital, for example. And I know that if Tracy were here, she'd say, and she and I meet and talk about this very often, about the number of joint appointments and agreed clinical pathways between the Homerton, Barts and the Royal London that again have evolved over very, very many years. So I think probably the key message is this isn't entirely new. The clinicians have been working together. If we look at the early diagnosis centre at Mile End Hospital, which actually has attracted quite a lot of interest from the media recently as offering a green diagnostic pathway, it was a North East London-wide collaborative, and we have clinicians across the piece all contributing to that and working together. So I think clinicians really are, just to emphasise, clinicians are enthusiastic about working together, and given the scale of the challenge that we have, whether that's planned care, urgent care, it feels that, you know, clinicians leading this with us supporting and not allowing governance or the fact we've got sovereign organisations getting in the way of that has to be the best thing to do for patients, you know, because that will enable us all to deliver more equitable services for all patients in North East London.
Hey, colleagues, any more questions? Councillor Sweden and then Councillor Snell.
Okay. Yes, thanks very much for that, Alwen. I have a question about, I'm wondering whether the new structure will facilitate the greatest degree of integration on the ground in terms of telemedicine. It's unpopular at the moment because everybody wants to go and see their GP and everyone wants face-to-face consultations with their consultants. But nevertheless, if we're thinking about the real world and problems of cross-infection, it's quite important. And also, When we were setting up the Pan London stroke system, it was pointed out that if you were able to diagnose that someone had a clot rather than a bleed, and you got them to be thrombolyzed quickly, in fact, considerably more quickly than the target that was set, the outcomes were immeasurably better, and that required the consultant to be able to look at a scan to tell which sort of stroke it was, and because anybody can be thrombolyzed anywhere, it's, you know, a nurse can do it. So I'm sure that example, I'm not expecting, you know, can be rolled out elsewhere, and I just wondered to what extent your new systems reorganisation and collaboration with BHRUT is going to allow for greater efficiency through telemedicine.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, you know, telemedicine will, for me, sit within the overall virtual and the digital strategies that, you know, are enabling certainly a whole range of ways in which we're able to deliver better care, more efficient care, more effective care to patients. And I think, again, if we pare that back, and if we look at North East London, for example, that actually the Homerton and Barts Health as a whole now are using Cerner platforms in terms of our patient administration systems, and that enabling then a common approach, really. We need to do some work with BHRUT to get them on a similar platform. They've got a very old legacy system. So I suppose in the context of there's some enabling work to be done to ensure that all our hospitals, with our local systems, because we know, for example, in North East London, we have a very good integrated East London health and social care record, which is going to be a huge game changer, really, in the way that we're able to deliver care, and in the way in which hospital clinicians and primary care clinicians and hospital clinicians across different hospitals are able to work together. You know, to look at scans, to look at X-ray images, to look at MRI images, you know, wherever they are in the system, and being able to advise on that basis. So I think the answer is yes, and it gives us, I think, a real opportunity to do digital at scale, and really provide that underpinning in terms of safe care and delivery of safe care, but also giving us that flexibility to really make the most of advances in innovation. And just to build on your stroke example, both BHRT and Barts are working together now in a network to deliver what's called mechanical thrombectomy, which is a treatment now where we have radiologists actually treating strokes, that's not just diagnosing in the way you're describing, but they're now treating strokes, and that's actually come about as a single network for North East London. And what that does is it really then gives us a sustainable set of services that are really high quality for local people.
Thank you. Councillor Snell?
Two questions which I think are interrelated. It seems to me you're talking about various operational management tasks, and it would seem to me within a large organisation there are generally basically areas where some can cover a large number of different services, and others are really less done as close to the front line as possible. And I wondered, as this process develops, you've clearly already got links outside of this partnership that's being set up now. You've clearly got links with other surrounding health providers, and I wondered if you do see the potential to grow some of those services that can be provided, I don't know, pick out payroll or something like that, that can be provided more widely, that you're actually then going to build on the existing partnership and offer those services to other health providers locally. The other thing I'm interested in is you were reviewing various specialties, and it sounded very much about how can you link up best practice and support other areas where the quality of the patient experience can be improved. What I haven't heard yet is an understanding of how potential patients can be brought closer to the front line. You talked, I think, about occupational health moving to Whipps Cross because that somehow was closer to the community. What is the process by which you'll be looking at frontline access to different services. Where are the areas of strength? Where are the areas of weakness? That, to me, requires a collaboration with other providers locally. So I'd just like to be talked through that, if you could, please.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't hear all of that. I think I've got the gist of it. So, but I think your question is about how do we extend that collaboration and review of services in terms of levelling up services to a consistent quality, and certainly that's indeed the direction of travel. That effectively, specialty by specialty, our clinicians across the geography, and this, we might touch on this in the next item about the integrated care system, because in a sense what we're describing as a collaborative is actually going to be a fundamental part of the ICS structures going forward, not just in North East London but across the country. So this is very much about clinicians working together to look at, I mean, what clinicians do really well is they look at data, they look at best practice, they do a lot of audit, and, you know, by us effectively facilitating these networks of clinicians working together, they can then look to see how we can provide consistently high standards in each of our hospitals in the ICS. A really good example of this is cancer services. So we know already in North East London that we're sort of not only best in London, but actually best nationally on some of our outcomes for tumour groups. And that's because we know that we have a North East London Cancer Alliance, our clinicians are working together. And it's that as an example that we would want to make sure we've got, we can describe how that's working across all specialties. So it will be for each group of specialties of clinicians to be working together to say, how can we make the best use of the assets that we have with this very challenging agenda? You know, and they are looking at, you know, clearly, for example, around planned care, what's the best way of treating, quite frankly, as many patients as we can, because of the very significant backlog that we have, and the patients that we have to treat. So, you know, my sense and my experience of working in the NHS, if we've got clinicians leading this with managers really working with them and actually having very good connectivity with our local communities, that over time our aspiration is that actually we're delivering really, really good care across the whole of our geography. And, you know, we've got a lot more flexibility for patient choice effectively across all of the hospitals in our area.
I see a hand from Councillor Salva-Macallan, so I want to then make this the last question.
I was actually going to ask this for the next section, but I think it's relevant here. It's just following on from that, it's quite large. And at what point is the kind of local patient engagement voice within the structure really have a place? You know, at what point is that kind of feeding in? Just trying to get a sense of where that would sit.
So it was a question about patient voice and patient engagement. So I think this is absolutely key. And when I sort of describe the work of our clinical boards, that's the clinicians, but working very much with patients and making sure that each of the ways in which we take forward our thinking around future services, that we would want the patient voice absolutely at the heart of this. And at the moment, we've certainly got mechanisms for that. That's happening. That some of that's happening at borough level. That some of that's happening within specialties. But it's certainly an area we would want to make sure that effectively we develop as a consequence of this collaboration. Because at the end of the day, the collaboration between our clinicians and our patients is effectively what's really going to help us design the services for the future.
Okay, I'm going to draw that item to a close. Oliver, thank you very much. That was certainly a very helpful overview and also some idea about where we're heading. So thank you very much for that item. As was alluded to, this ties in now with the third substantive item, which is the implementation of the integrated care system. The white paper is progressing. I think we're working towards Henry early to mid 2022 in terms of it becoming crystallised, and as I understand it, you're sort of working towards that in the structures that you're creating now, and you've given a helpful presentation that's actually in the agenda pack about some of the key tenets of that. Is it? Am I going to go to Mary first for an overview, and then to Henry? Is that the plan, or straight to Henry? You're on mute, Mary.
Yeah, straight to me.
We're going straight to Henry, then I'm going to update you on progress over the last week.
Perfect. Thank you, Henry.
Thank you. So, as you say, Councillor Hayes, there is a pack of slides in the overall papers. I'm assuming that, given the nature of the meeting, it's not going to help for me to share my screen, or unless it would. Otherwise,
I think we've all got it.
If everyone's got it, I'll refer to it as we go along, and I'll say I'll make reference to the slides we're on. So essentially, you should have a pack which is about 13 or 14 slides long. So I will start on slide 3, because the first slide is the introductory slide and the content. So essentially, the first substantive slide on slide 3 describes the current status of the legislation. So in previous sessions of this committee, we've brought updates about where the bill is and how it was first received its first reading at the beginning of July. It's now gone through its second reading and is in committee stage, and then we'll then expect it to report back to the lower house in November, and then move on to the upper house. But it's expected to have royal assent in March 2022. So that's pretty tight timescales, given the fact that the new organisation needs to be stood up by the 1st of April. But that's the timescale we're working to. As the pack says, it's the first major piece of primary legislation on health and social care since 2011 or 2012. The Act eventually went through, but it's probably the biggest piece of legislation, or the most profound change to the way the NHS operates for probably more like 30 years, because previous iterations have effectively established a commissioning body and then created a new commissioning body, whereas what the legislation now does, it abolishes CCGs and creates an integrated care board, which is designed to be a brand new type of organisation, which is not, strictly speaking, a separate bureaucratic commissioning body in the same way that CCGs and before them PCTs were, but is in fact a new vehicle to enable collaboration between all partners within health and social care. It builds on the legislation builds on national policy for the last 5 years or more, but in fact going before that. But what it's been described as legislation catching up with policy, because NHS England established STPs initially, and then ICSs as national policy from as far back as 2016. So the Health and Care Bill effectively creates new structures that enable the current policy to be stood up in law. So there are effectively 4 kind of core component parts to an ICS. The Health and Care Bill requires NHS partners to establish the ICB, which is the new statutory body for the CCG to replace the CCG, and an Integrated Care Partnership Board. So those are the 2 core committees, and then as we'll talk about later, there are vehicles for place-based collaboration at an individual borough or an individual place, which we're calling our place-based partnerships, and then provider collaboratives, which enable all of the work that Alwen was describing in the last session. So moving on to slide 4, this gives an overview of the new Integrated Care Partnership. This is if you like, the overall system board, which will sit above the statutory body of the new ICB, and will be constituted with all partners across the whole of North East London. So that will include local authorities, providers, but also members of Healthwatch and other local partners who may also represent the kind of functions like law enforcement and planning and housing and education potentially, and other areas that may be considered to be important parts of an overall partnership.
The ICB sits above the ICB, the partnership board sits above the ICB board, technically.
ICB, yeah. It's a strategic forum that sets the strategy for the integrated care board to then execute as the statutory body. Slide 5 then describes in a bit more detail the new statutory body. So it's being called the Integrated Care Board, which is slightly confusing because it will be both a board and a new entity. The new entity will replace the CCG, but the board will comprise members from local authorities, providers, and the ICB itself.
A quick question here, Henry. When it says partner members, at least one member from local authorities, does that mean one member from each local authority, or does that mean one member overall?
The law says at least one member from the overall local authorities, and Marie's going to give us an update on where we've got to, but it doesn't mean one from every local authority. It means one from the overall local authority, which is one of the reasons why the partnership boards that sits above it is useful, because that's not going to be the statutory body, the committee of the statutory body, the partnership board. So it can therefore be a broader church and have wider representation. But Marie will give us an update on precisely where those discussions have got to after I've finished. So on slide 5, it then sets out some of the other key kind of components, like the minimum membership of the board, so the chair and other members, and then the chief exec, the CFO, the director of nursing, and the medical director being the mandated exec roles. The next slide, slide 6, describes in a bit more detail the provider collaboratives and the place-based partnerships. And as we've just heard from Alwen about how the provider collaboratives will provide a bit of a forum for clinical practice and expertise to link together across networks effectively between primary, secondary, and tertiary care, and enable that kind of much more collaborative working. And enable us to have better ways of reducing variation and sharing resources and sharing best practice. The place-based partnerships, there will be 7 place-based partnerships, so effectively mirroring the old CCG, so one for every borough and then one covering City and Hackney. But they will not be a kind of reinvention of the CCG. They will have very different kind of purpose, and they will be around population health management and bringing together partners around a kind of neighbourhood health and care model, much like those that are being developed already. If I go on to slide 8, it describes a bit more about what those place-based partnerships are there to do. So again, they will bring partners who are well positioned to understand the needs of the given population at a borough or borough plus level. So around the bringing together the partners who understand precisely the kind of demographics and the community kind of characteristics of each of our populations, help support local decision making around what how those neighbourhood needs and the population needs will best be met, kind of problem solve and fix issues that require partners to work together, and where individual organisations working on their own won't be able to fix things. There's also a little box there about cross-borough partnerships. So historically, we have worked in different cross-borough partnerships to date in health, but there will be other kind of BHR obviously have a very close working relationship with those 3 boroughs. But in future, for example, the Whips Cross development will require Redbridge and Waltham Forest to work closely together. And now we mentioned the very high levels of demographic growth that are expected in both Barking, Dagenham and Newham, and into Tower Hamlets as well. So we expect Barking, Dagenham and Newham to have close working relationships at a place level in the future. The slide 9 describes a bit more about provider collaboration, but I think everything that Alwen has said about bringing that to life through the BHRUT and Barts work is probably can say much more than a slide. Slide 10 describes the emerging high level. Sorry?
Yeah, sorry. I think
yeah, slide 10 describes. Yeah. Slide 10 describes the high level governance, and it's emerging is probably the best way of describing it, because we're certainly not rushing to design governance now. We're working with partners to be clear about the benefits of working in collaboration and what those how those benefits can bring to bear better outcomes for patients, and then we will design the governance around what is required to enable those decisions to best be made at the right place. So that slide 10 is a bit of a placeholder for now, but we'll certainly develop as we move forward. And then I guess slides 11 and 12 and 13, they describe really 11 and 12 certainly, patients at the heart of the ICS, and the way that we are going to be working with ICS partners, including the local authorities, but Healthwatch and the voluntary sector. Those are the kind of key relationships that we're trying to form. And at that point, I will probably hand over to Marie, because I know she wants to give a bit more of an update on where we're at with some of those partnership development pieces of work.
Thanks, Henry. So we're really trying to co-produce the governance with a real focus on the purpose of why we're here, which is to reduce health inequalities, integrate care, and improve access, experience, and outcomes. So slide 11, which I think is 21 in your pack, outlines some of our work on resident participation. So we want to look at it as a co-production, so participating alongside, and we're working particularly with the voluntary sector and with Healthwatch to actually define what that should look like, while still using all the ways in which local government, health trusts, and the voluntary sector actually already engage. So we're not trying to duplicate; we're trying to build on the strength that we have in others. But I thought I'd tell you a little bit about the meetings we've had the last couple of weeks, and with others that are coming up. So first of all, in terms of the co-production with local authorities, we've been looking at the Integrated Care Board of the ICS, and where we've got to is there's a small working group of local authority leaders, and where we've got to on that is actually we want to have 2 local authority reps on the board of 15, one from inner and one from outer, and that we would like there to be sort of whoever local authorities agree that should be with some kind of process which is to be devised by local authorities. There'll be rotations every 3 years. The other thing that we talked about was making sure that coming together had a real focus on improvement. So we really want to focus on what added value do we bring by bringing all our resources and all our intent together. And there's models, for example, in NHS Scotland, where they've brought all their public service resources and voluntary sector and residents together to tackle specific areas. At the moment, we're debating what our priorities should be for our joint action. And those range from ideas from maternity, health for BME communities, all the way to knife crime and back to employment and housing. So we have a big event on the 6th of October to try and thrash that out. The other thing that we agreed with our local authority leaders on I think it was on the 2nd, we had that meeting in September, is that the independent chair should chair both the Health and Care Partnership, the wider body, as well as the ICB board, to make sure there's total alignment between those. And then as chair, I would be held to account by the partnership for delivery of the strategy that we've agreed to deliver together. There was discussions about the Health and Care Partnership. There's going to be more work, and the working group are going to work on more things about how do we make the Health and Care Partnership inclusive but not too unwieldy. We really know that social care has to have a big voice in that partnership. But what do we do, for example, with the private sector, as an example, given the number of care homes perhaps we have in Havering? So those are up for debate. And really, we've been doing a lot of thinking about place-based arrangements. That is still ongoing. And one of the things that happened as a consequence, I'm going to meeting with all the health and wellbeing chairs to sort of thrash out what do those place-based partnerships relationship have to look like with health and wellbeing boards for it all to make sense and to all add value. In terms of Healthwatch, we have regular meetings with Healthwatch, got another coming up, and they're very clear that their engagement should be at place level, that they're borough-based organisations, they really want to work at place. So we're working with them about what that could look like. With the voluntary organisations, we're really fortunate actually. We'd already agreed that we were going to fund. We're working with your umbrella bodies that you have in place, and we'd already agreed to fund a member of staff to work with them to think about how they could work together across the whole North East London system, and to ensure they can not only help us shape but also deliver services and evaluate services alongside us. And we jointly put in a bid to NHS England, and we've only found out today that we've actually received that funding to help even more work to think about how we work best with the voluntary sector in a really meaningful way. And finally, I just wanted to talk about the partnership with our clinicians, because clinical leadership is critically important. So, you know, we look at it as resident-driven, clinically led, and management-enabled. And I had a meeting recently with our primary care clinical leadership, because with the removal of CCGs, we're all really concerned to make sure that primary care has a strong and united voice in place, but also across the wider ICS partnership. And we're looking at specific roles to support that. And there's discussion at our clinical advisory group about how do we do that across the system. So, and that's both clinicians, but also social care professionals and others working together on that. Oh gosh, finally, the role for the chief executive of the ICS is actually advertised currently, and with a closing date at the end of this month. And of course, partners are involved both as, even though it's a national process, we're involving partners both in the stakeholder sessions, but also at the interview panel itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. I mean, I've got a number of questions, but I'll open it to members first. If there's no hands jumping up. I mean, one of my sort of initial questions is, I understand those four areas that sort of Henry's outlined, but at the moment on just the commissioning, which say at the moment is done, for example, in City and Hackney, who's going to be come the advent of this new system? Is City and Hackney still going to have its own team of commissioners that's commissioning service of that, or is that going to go a team of commissioners based upon, say, specialisation or area that go across the whole of the Inel footprint? But then how do you still ensure place-based commissioning? I appreciate the place-based partnership, but actually at the commissioning level, that they're focused. How do they know about sort of the Jewish community in Hackney or Durham, who provides services to the Turkish and Kurdish population? How are we going to ensure that is not lost at the commissioning level?
Would you want to take that, Henry?
Yeah, I'll take that. So it's a really, really good point, Ben. And the key thing is that the place-based partnerships will be the bedrock of the new organisation. So there's no intention to strip any resources out of those that are currently local. There might be some areas where it makes sense to kind of do things once across North East London, and some of the more specialist acute stuff, for example, would make sense to do that, and that would then free up the place-based partnerships to do exactly as you say. They are the ones who really understand the communities that they serve and the services that those communities require, and what the intent behind the legislation is to I guess enhance the ability of a place to do that by not just being health making decisions on health resources, but also those services that are provided, but also bringing local authority and voluntary sector partners around the same table to make those decisions around what does the population need and what does a neighbourhood health and care model need to look like to do that. So the intent is absolutely to continue to focus that, if not enhance it.
So just if we then look at it from a financial level, what we've been talking about the 80-20 split over the last few years, is that something that you envisage would roughly continue, say, whereby 80% of the sort of the commissioning pot would go down to those 7 place-based partnerships to make place-based commissioning, with, I would understand, tier of 20% may vary slightly, to do with those services that are most efficiently and best in patient interest commissioned at a higher level? Is that still roughly what we're looking at from a financial perspective?
Absolutely. I mean, Yeah, that's absolutely the commitment. I mean, it's you know, the 80-20 sometimes it's the kind of thing that you sort of you say once and then you wish you'd never said it again because it continually comes back, because it won't be exactly 80, it won't be exactly 20, but the intention is absolutely to focus those resources on the local partnership work. Yeah.
Fine. Okay. And so still from, sorry members, let me open up. Any other members with questions? Sorry, Councillor Snell.
A main focus of our work in Hackney, Health and Hackney Scrutiny Commission, has been on the integrated care partnership and key areas. And it's been some very good work, and it started off too general, but it now seems to be delivering practical results in terms of working together better here in the City and Hackney. Now, I hope that's happening in other boroughs as well, but how is that then going to be integrated into similar streams of work? Are we going to lose that work, or are those existing officers working on those projects going to be transferred to new roles within the new structure, and where will that be?
So again, I can take that. The quality is not brilliant, so I couldn't hear everything. But what I think I heard was around the existing ICPB structures, and absolutely the intent, well, the commitment is to reinforce that structure. We wouldn't be changing anything. There'd be no need to make any fundamental changes to that structure. So it would not be a case of sweeping that away and starting with something new. The new legislation may require us to slightly tweak some of the governance, and there might be certain aspects that might need to change, but fundamentally that group and its focus and the programme of work and its core membership, the intent is to reinforce that and to work on the foundations that we've already got and to build on that.
Any others from members? Henry or Mary, I mean, what about, we've gone from a situation though where your technical sort of commissioning is essentially being GP focused at your CCGs, to one now where if we look at the board, it's much more provider heavy. How is that, and also just dovetailing with sort of what we've heard about sort of the national insurance rise and the sort of the queries about whether this money will ever really see its way into, say, social care. How are you going to ensure, Mary, that the providers don't monopolise or take over the arrangements, where actually in the interest of population, if more went towards prevention or more went towards GPs or more went towards social care, that would actually be the better interests of residents? So how are you going to stop sort of the influence focusing towards the providers?
So I think what we've got in our pack is what we're being asked to do nationally. We're taking the guidance as guidance rather than as requirements at the minute until we're told otherwise. So what we're trying to do with the board is make it reflect not just the individual partners, but also our geographies as well. So there will be primary care representation on that board. There will be local authority representation on that ICP board, as well as there being NHS provider organisations on that board as well. So I think that although it may look like in terms of the requirements, it might be provider heavy, as you say, it actually is a board that's trying to represent all the different constituencies of our partnership. Which is responsible not to represent their selves, but actually represent the whole partnership in moving towards its ambition. And also, I mean, I do believe that working across primary care and NHS providers, the voluntary sector, and with our residents, that actually our commissioning decisions will be better. And our providers are just as much as primary care and other clinicians want to see the best outcomes for patients, want to reduce variation. And that's why the ambition and the priorities we choose as well are so important, because what we're actually doing is holding each other to account. There's going to be mutual accountability in this. We're going to make commitments to one another to transform services, improve services and quality, and to integrate care. And we're able to hold each other to account. The other second thing is that there's a relationship directly with the Health and Care Partnership, which is a wider group of people that will be represented, but also will have a role in setting a health and wellbeing strategy. And I would be responsible as chair of both to make sure that they're aligned, and that the Integrated Care Board is ensuring that the system delivers that strategy as well. So I think the arrangements are being established to enable mutual benefit and mutual accountability, rather than to say one grouping is more responsible than another.
Okay, thank you. Any Councillor Master?
It's a slight conflict of interest because it does touch on my day role, but more at a kind of broader theoretical level. The primary care maturity matrix is a fantastic document, and the end point and ultimate ambition seems to be to sort of embed the voluntary sector and our communities and community voices at the very heart of the system as an integral part of planning, co-design. How do we ensure that happens with our providers? I mean, you were talking about havering and private providers. I'm just wondering how much power there will be in the system to ensure they do listen to their respective communities.
So I know that each of our public sector organisations already have relationships with voluntary sector organisations and actually commission themselves voluntary organisations to work alongside them. But this is the whole point of funding the worker, because we're trying to do this in a co-produced way. It's not for us to define that on our own as sort of as a partnership of strategy organisations. We need to be working as we are with voluntary sector umbrella organisations and Healthwatch to help us to define what should that look like in practice so that it's meaningful. And actually I can't at this moment in time say that, the ICS will be able to, has it all worked out in terms of how that will work because of those ongoing discussions. But I'm sure we're going to be commissioning organisations for our residents to be at. There will be commissioning levers and governance levers that we could use to encourage those that we commission to actually work alongside voluntary organisations in their geography and actually work with our place-based partnerships and our PCNs to make that a reality. Thank you.
Any further? I could go get.
We've got a thing coming up on the screen saying to auto power off.
Is everyone still hear me? Yeah, we're still.
It's going to go off in
Oh, I think in the members' screen in the room, something's going to go off. So someone's going to come and assist. Yeah. I think you can still hear everything though, can't we? And while we sort out the video. We've only got, we're slightly over. Very quickly, Mary, if I could just ask you finally, if I understood you correctly, the chair of the ICD will also be the chair of the ICP, and that looks like you're designate chair at the moment. I mean, how does that work in terms of governance? Are you satisfied you can hold yourself to account, or is it not, or does that not create some conflict?
No, so I think that's I think one of the benefits of having me as chair of the Health and Care Partnership, but the local authority leaders, this discussion I wasn't part of, so Marie Price might need to jump in because she was in the room. It was one about having somebody who was independent, and I have an independence on both of those, role in both of those balls, but it actually was a mechanism other than via the NHS for me to be held to account by the wider partnerships. So through my chairing of that partnership, I'm chairing the meetings, but that also means that partnership are able to decide whether or not I'm fulfilling the sort of aims and objectives that they've set. So I understand what you mean about there could be a conflict of interest, but actually it's about trying to make me more accountable locally rather than just up into the sort of NHS system.
Okay, thank you. And one very quick question I've just been reminded of that we've that's sort of come up with Healthwatch. I note you say about sort of the desire of the Healthwatches to very much remain at a place-based level, but presumably there needs to be some need for a Healthwatch-based accountability structure at an NEL level, which I think we're missing at the moment. Certainly from my perspective, it would be useful to have their critique of you, which we don't currently have because no one fulfills that function. what work is being done with that?
So, to be honest, Councillor Hayhurst, we went into the meeting, Marie Price and I, expecting to be able to organise some kind of NEL-wide Healthwatch collective or collaborative. Healthwatch, in the first instance, has not seen that as the best way forward. So we are going to continue to we have bi-monthly meetings with them, and hopefully that will be the way through which we can be held to account. And perhaps over time, Healthwatch will see that this is quite a useful way of working actually across the sort of 8 boroughs, I think, local authorities, so they can see how the whole works as well as the individual parts. But at this moment in time, they want to focus on getting place right, and then think about across the whole of North East London. Is that right, Marie P. Rice? Sorry.
Marie,
yeah, sorry, Chair. Thank you, Marie. Yes, it's something that we're still working on with Healthwatch. So they're clear about the local representation, but in terms of how they'll work at a North East London level, they still are having further discussions about it. We're open to their suggestions and their views on that, and we've got a meeting with them later this month. So we'll come back to you and let you as a committee know the progress on that.
Thank you. Okay, with 5 minutes over, so I'm going to draw that item to a close. I'm not sure the members have their screen back yet, or is it still the same? Right, well, the next item is going to be a bit trickier then. So we're going to move on to the sort of the COVID update, which is normally quite slide heavy. Thank you, Simon Hall, and welcome. Following your very helpful presentation last time, we've asked you to come back. You've provided some helpful slides. The members in the room currently, their screen is, they can't see it. So if you want to start your presentation, if I can ask you, but if there's any way you can perhaps do it assuming people can't see the slides, so making sure you're explaining what you're saying as you go, if that makes any sense.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think, frankly, I was going to concentrate on vaccinations, which is what I'm in charge of, and I was going to not really follow the slides anyway, because it moves very quickly on a daily basis, but I'm very happy to take questions in relation to what's in the slides as well. Just to let people know, we've now over 2.3 million vaccinations that we've done for COVID in North East London, which is an amazing achievement and can only have been done really through partnership between all the different organisations involved, and we're particularly grateful to councils for all their support in helping in many different ways around the vaccination programme, and in fact the help that we continue to get on a daily basis from all our local authority colleagues. We've essentially achieved over 65% of our population having first doses, and that is obviously highest in the older groups, with our 65 pluses being over 80%, in the high 80% actually, in terms of the vaccinations delivered. It's still improving in our younger groups, and our experience at the moment is that it builds once you've got the first wave of people within the cohorts as we've done them, then it only builds gradually, but it does still keep building. It's been a very complex programme, partly because actually the programme has been a very gradual rollout, and it was like we do this group then, and then you add that group on, and sometimes they're announced with either very little notice or with lots of fanfare, and then no announcement on the day you expect. So it has been quite a challenge logistically, but again, I know that that people understand that. And it's also been delivered across a lot of different modes of delivery. So everything from vaccine centres, GP-run hubs, community pharmacies and hospital hubs. In North East London, I'm very proud to say we've done over 70% of our vaccinations from the local vaccines centres run by GPs and our community pharmacists. So local really has been best, and that's what we've done in our programme. Currently, the programme is focusing on a number of things in addition that are quite high profile. We rolled out recently the jab to 16 and 17-year-olds, and that's being done primarily through vaccine centres, but also the local vaccine centres and the community pharmacies. Booking for that has been more complicated, so it's largely a drop-in. Levels still are picking up on those at the moment. We're currently vaccinating the 12 to 15-year-olds with clinical conditions which suggest they're more vulnerable, and that's being done, and GPs and also hospital specialist services are contacting patients on their books and their families to arrange that at the moment, and some of those have already taken place. And then we've recently had announced that in people who are immune suppressed, it is recommended to provide them with a third dose of the vaccine, and we have begun contacting them to call them in for that now. We've also at the moment got a particular push in terms of our staff, and particularly staff that are going into care homes, because as you know, legislation has gone through that by the 11th of November, people working in care homes, with some exceptions, will be required to have 2 doses of the vaccine. So we've got a particular push on that for the moment. Today, you'll have seen an announcement from the Chief Medical Officer about 12 to 15-year-olds. It's still waiting a ministerial announcement, so I can't categorically exactly what's happening when, but it's likely that we will try to begin to offer those jabs from the 22nd, that's middle of next week. The model for that is predominantly to do that in schools, and we currently are working with the school age immunisation provider commissioned by NHS England nationally and each of our local authorities to try and sort out the most pragmatic way to get that delivered. There are a number of issues, as you can imagine, but we hope to use the usual way of consenting and everything else that schools and parents will be familiar with. We're now moving into phase 3 of the programme. It sounds like we're already in it, I suppose, but there's an official phase 3 which will start with the boosters. We are awaiting announcement, hopefully on Tuesday, but at the moment we actually don't know to whom the boosters will be given, which vaccine it will be using, or possibly vaccines, and what dose there is. So we're awaiting a number of decisions on that will be announced by the JCVI on Tuesday, and we are scenario planning because it could be, there isn't just one possible option. So hopefully that will come from in a very clear manner early next week. And then we also have a thing called the Evergreen Offer, which is a fairly ghastly term, but anyway, what that is essentially anyone who hasn't yet had a vaccine but who is on the list of people who might receive one. Ultimately that probably is everyone 12 plus, that we continue to be able to offer them a vaccine, either 1 dose if they're 12 to 17, or 2 doses if they're over that, and possibly 3 for some of the people we just talked about. So all those things are happening. We've managed to get, as part of phase 3, additional community pharmacy sites, which are really good. And also we've put together more local GP primary care network run sites across all of North East London, and we will actually be standing down some of our vaccination centres because actually we recognise that phase 3 will again mainly be delivered locally, and we have information about where people can get a jab widely available on our website, and Don, who's on the call, and his team regularly update that on a daily basis. We have quite a lot of pop-ins and pop-ups and drop-ins and so on. There's also a website called Grab a Jab where we update information, as well as people who are 18 and over can book a jab through the National Booking Service. There you go. That was hopefully a whistle-stop tour.
It was. Thank you, Simon. Very helpful. Members, questions? Councillor Snell?
Rather than refer to your presentation, I would like to refer to the dashboard. My memory of our last visit to these figures is that our real concern was about the low levels, particularly of second vaccines, to those in domiciliary care outside an established care home and other managed settings. Now, I looked at the dashboard today and I couldn't see those figures, even though it's the low levels of take-up there that are a particular concern to us. So I just wondered what those figures are and whether any of the initiatives to address that cohort have been successful. A second question too, please. It's interesting, as a volunteer in the vaccination centres, anecdotally, I hear that people have been moving, increasingly younger people seem to prefer pharmacies rather than GP-led providers. Is that just our experience, or have you seen that across the board, that younger people don't have the links to GPs and therefore seem far more prepared to walk into pharmacies? Thank you.
Okay. On the domiciliary care figures, I'm afraid we deliberately haven't included them because there's a degree of issue around their reliability, but we do have a regular dashboard that I can share after the meeting with members around our social care figures in terms of how many people have been vaccinated. Rates are improving. We like them to improve more, and that's why we're putting further effort, particularly this week and next, into ensuring people are able to get a dose in the context of particularly the push around care homes. But working very closely with all the directors of social care across all of our boroughs at the moment, and we have a particular group where we focus on that. So I'm very happy to supply that dashboard, which I didn't include in the pack, to members later. Secondly, community pharmacies. Well, it's hard to say whether any particular reasons for community pharmacies being so popular, but they are. They've been particularly popular for us, and actually particularly in our boroughs. And more young people are coming forward for the vaccination. I think really we have to continue to have several different modes, and then people find the mode that is not much more useful for them. I don't think one can generalise in terms of this group for this or that. We're offering a number of different modes, and hopefully they'll be able to take up the vaccine, whichever is the most convenient mode for them. I don't know whether Mark wants to add anything from a GP perspective in terms of any intelligence for how people are coming into vaccine centres now locally across GP services. No, probably not.
Oh, you're muted. You're muted, Mark.
Yeah. I wouldn't say I've got anything more than Simon said on that. Actually, you just need to continue this mixed offer of many different ways, and keep working at it, because different offers suit different people.
Thank you. So, Simon, can I just drill you on the domiciliary then? I do understand, and I recall some of the issue with the recording, that some of the providers use the domiciliary care providing different levels of accuracy of how one of their staff have had it, and that feeds into possibly the inaccuracy of the data. But the 11th of November, if I've got that right, deadline applies only to residential care homes. It doesn't apply to domiciliary. I still sort of appreciating the problem. I mean, do you have a member of staff ringing around every provider saying, give us a list, why aren't you hauling them over the coals for any form of contractual obligation you can do, just to get some sort of gauge on what the accuracy of the figures are and what greater work we need to do?
I don't have a member of staff doing that, but I have a member of staff who contacts my local authority colleagues who do have people who are doing that. So yes, by proxy. Effectively. So yes, we are doing that, and we're doing it regularly, and I do have somebody who updates the dashboard I referred to. I can't find the dashboard on my system because I've got so much email, otherwise I'd have been able to share it with you now, but I will make sure you have it via your committee officers tomorrow.
But I mean, I suppose just the only thing on domiciliary is actually just is there any, are we mapping any evidence that in the hospital admissions, there's a disproportionate number of, say, patients from a domiciliary setting that are coming through, for example, just to sort of stock check us, because obviously if that was coming through, then obviously it's an even greater concern that something needs to be done there. Or are you looking at it from that angle?
I don't think our data is sophisticated enough to actually look at it from that perspective. I would refer members to the very useful piece earlier in the week that Barts ran with, I think it was Channel 4, in terms of the types of people who were currently in local intensive care departments, which might provide some insight to that. But we don't have that specific data, because actually to publish such data would probably be difficult, because it gets down to quite an individualized level.
Members? Councillor Sweden?
Oh, thanks. Yes, I'm not quite up to speed on the documents, having had a problem to have access from them today. But I saw some very alarming figures last week, and it might have been focusing on social care staff. But I wonder whether you got any comment on the ethnic breakdown of the rollout of vaccines as it is at the moment. Any central attempts that are made to confront anti-vax myths that are put about, and any initiatives that are still going forward to try and reach a more equitable distribution of vaccines amongst the community at large. I remember I was particularly disturbed by a figure referring to people of Caribbean heritage, which showed, I think, vaccination rates in the 30%, which I think it might have been referring to people working in frontline social care roles rather than the population at large. But wherever it was very disconcerting, and I wondered whether there was any overarching strategy to keep working at this highly inequitable situation. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question, and actually at the heart of our strategy and why we're trying to make things available in all these different ways. We have found actually that having more pharmacies has actually improved uptake amongst particularly the black groups in our local populations. I think it's just because people are more familiar with them and they are close to where people live. I think there may be some other reasons. We've also found that when we've offered whole households, we called it a multi-generational household initiative, which we started in Newham and then rolled out across all of our services. When we offered a whole household, all the members vaccine at the same time, normally we could get a chink into one person who was quite keen, and then they just brought the rest of the household with them. So we've been doing some quite innovative things. It is difficult. Our vaccination rate, although has gone up considerably for the black groups locally, but both Black Caribbean, Black African and so on. Now across all of North East London it's 54%, which still we could do better on, but we've got issues with both those population and also the what's called the white other population, where our numbers are not as high as we would like, and we are working with colleagues in public health, our councils, and lots of local voluntary and community organisations to really think about how we put messages out differently, how we actually try and encourage people to come in by using actually people in those groups who've had the vaccine who can be ambassadors for things like that. So people can see that it's not sort of doctors and people like me, but actually it's people like them that are advocating use of the vaccine. But it is a complicated one. We're also learning from bits across the rest of London, although our rates are pretty good and very comparable across the rest of London. We've also had feedback from other cities across the world which actually want to copy what we're doing, particularly in North East London, because they're having, they've got even bigger issues in terms of disparity between vaccine rates. So we're certainly not complacent, but I think we are doing an awful lot. I hope that reassures members.
And I think you may have alluded to it before in terms of, I'm not entirely familiar with the, if you said it was the Channel 4 and Barts work about some of the work, but to what extent are we looking at, it may be doing on a national level, but on a North East London level, the numbers of people that are either admitting or passing away in North East London that have not had the vaccine, compared to those that have. So I think I saw something from the ONS a few days ago that say the figure was something like 259 people in the last number of months have actually died that have had the vaccine. So actually a very small percentage, a very small number. And obviously that's a very strong message to get the vaccine, once you actually understand, to reinforce the message of its effectiveness. So are we sort of compiling that level of data to form local messaging, or are we relying on the national stage to compile that sort of data?
Well, we do actually look at that data as far as we've got it very regularly across all of our trusts and our group, where we have all the parties that are involved in our vaccination programme. We tend always to try to look at local North East London figures because our population is very different from the rest of the country. So that's precisely why we do that. I don't know whether Henry wants to come in terms of things that come through the Strategic Role Command Group, but we are acutely aware that actually we need to look at our population very differently, and we always do.
Just, Henry, can you just give us some overview then in terms of, say, the last 4 to 6 weeks or 2 months of hospital admissions, and how many of those, what percentage of those are unvaccinated? Do you know that sort of?
I don't have that figure to hand. I would have to discuss whether we were able to release that. Don might have it. I mean, we've got something. But
I can, Chair, I can give you a statistic we have, which is that since July, we've had 203 people admitted to intensive care, and of those, only 22 had received both doses of the vaccine. So that's 10% basically, 10.8%. So 90% of patients in intensive care since July have not had both doses of the vaccine.
I mean, that's pretty powerful. Are we transposing that into messaging?
Yes.
Yeah, it's gone out on the comms. I tweeted it myself, but and it has gone out on the comms. But we can certainly try to ask people to spread the message further wide. Yeah.
Just before I go, Councillor Hudson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. You talk about those who have both doses. The table you give us on ethnicity only shows the percentage of people who had the first dose. I would have thought, in view of this importance, it would be relevant for us to have the information on people who had second doses rather than first dose.
I can get that information as well. It gets very busy to put all first and seconds on all slides, but we can do another one with the second dose on. And the percentages are a bit smaller, as you'll see from the overall second dose figure, but we are really promoting the second dose at the moment for exactly the reasons you suggest. The second dose is certainly something that's particularly needed given the way that the Delta variant is behaving. So we're really trying to promote that in our comms at the moment.
And have you any idea about the number of people admitted to hospital who've had one dose but not two?
I don't have that information at my fingertips, but I don't know whether Henry has it.
I don't have it now. We've done it based on either both. The message is to get both. So we're focusing on if you only have one or you have no dose, then you're still at risk. And by getting the second dose, you're giving yourself the most protection.
We are a scrutiny committee, and without giving us this information, the information you provide us is really pretty useless.
Well, I mean, there are. I'm not sure because of the technical difficulties. The slide pack is fairly detailed in terms of what we're getting. I appreciate.
I'm looking at the page which has got them all. When you get them by ECG and ethnicity, it's so tiny I can't read it on my screen, I'm afraid.
Okay.
I'm looking at the page above it that gives ethnicity, and it only gives the first dose all the way across. But what the officers are talking about is, having the second dose, and we're being given different in relation to two different sets of figures. And as a scrutiny committee, we're not being given the information required to enable us to do our job as a scrutiny committee chair.
Okay, or it may be something we can take up for a future presentation. I mean, just one thing that sort of goes through my mind is I wouldn't want heavily pressed officers to be spending time on a slide just for us.
I appreciate that.
Vis-a-vis a better use of their resource, but it may be if for a future slide, if that data is available, that can be got. Simon, come to you quickly, and then I think we're wrapping up.
Yeah, well, I will feed that into our review of the slides because we're currently actually updating what we include in the slides, and one of the reasons why it's not in this because we haven't updated it for a little while in terms of all the things we have. We try, where possible, to automate it. I'd like us to include as well slides on the immunosuppressed 16 and 17-year-olds specifically, and the 12 to 15. So the next
and domiciliary care.
And well, I don't think the data's good enough to do it, but I'll have a go. But the next time you see the slide pack, hopefully it will include these other things in it. That's certainly my intention, and I've taken on board what you've said, and I'll do my best to ensure we add that next time. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to draw it to a close there because we're at 9 o'clock. So sorry if anyone else had any further questions. Thank you very much. That was incredibly useful from everybody. A very informative meeting. In terms of other items on the agenda, I think it's just very quickly to say minutes of previous meeting. Everybody, can I have them approved, please? Thank you. And work programme, I can discuss with colleagues where we are for the next meeting in terms of what the priorities will be. But thank you very much, everyone. And with that, I'll close the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.